welcome to Picture Me Coding. I am one of your hosts, Erik. My other host is Mike Mull. My other host, our co-hosting friend, Mike Mull, compadre. Hi, Mike.
Hola.
Mike, we have recorded more than 5 episodes of this podcast. Are you surprised we're still going here?
I am shocked and amazed.
Me too. A little bit of feedback, early feedback positive, but I don't know. It's a small sample set. You got any music for me this week? I'm always interested in what you're listening to.
I do. I couldn't find anything this week that was recent that I really loved, so I'm kind of going back into my archives.
Oh, I love it when you do that. Dig in those dusty milk crates for some records. Dig one out for us.
So back when I was in college in Tucson, Arizona, I would see these posters for upcoming shows, and there was this band called Giant Sandworms. I'm not sure that I ever actually saw them at any of the local clubs, but I would see them on posters, sometimes with the Meat Puppets, who are also popular in that area at the time.
Oh, yeah. 90s. That sounds very 90s to me, Meat Puppets.
More 80s.
Okay.
My college days. Anyway, in the early 90s, I read a review of an album by a band called Giant Sand, and I came to the conclusion that it was probably the same band. And the album is called Center of the Universe.
What a great band name, Giant Sand. I
Yeah.
just love that band. I've never heard of them. I love that name.
I love the name too, and it kind of evokes the Tucson vibe that they have. But yeah, I picked up this album. It came out in '92, so I bought it on CD. It's one of these things that I own.
I've never heard of those CDs. Sorry. Bad joke.
Yeah. It stands for compact disc.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
Yeah. Anyway, so I listened to this album, and at first I was kind of like, what in the hell is going on here? And then I slowly started to really enjoy it. It's one of these handful of albums of my lifetime where I think it's kind of a singular work of genius, and the rest of the world has decided that I am wrong about that. But yeah,
Okay, give me that album name again. I'm sorry. Give it to me again.
It's called Center of the Universe.
Okay, I got to hear it after this. Got it. Center of the Universe by Giant Sand.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to describe it. This came out in '92, and the first tune sounds like a bit like a noisy grunge track, and initially you're thinking, okay, I see where this is going. And then about halfway through the second track, it gets a little weird, and then it gets progressively weirder. Kind of veers into maybe like They Might Be Giants kind of territory on some of the tracks.
Huh.
But anyway, it's got this almost, it's kind of hard to describe musically, but it's, a little bit of guitar rock and a little bit of alt country sound. And the main guy behind the band is this guy named Howie Gelb, and I think he's the key songwriter. He's just got kind of a quirky thing going on.
Poor little universe stuck its thing. What fell out was a human being. I knew a little universe didn't mean a thing till he stubbed himself another being. Welcome to the center. Welcome.
I love it. Obviously, it did not have a huge cultural impact, but it's one of those albums that's at least popular enough that they put out a 25th anniversary reissue, and you can find it on Spotify and so forth.
Oh, wow. Okay, Spotify. All right. Mike, there were these school playground rules that I used to ascribe to when I was younger, and one of the rules was whoever can name the most obscure band gets a huge a number of points in cred, street cred. So you just like pulled a dusty LP out of the milk crate. Your cred on this episode just skyrocketed. I've never heard of this band.
Sweet.
And my example, if this were Schoolhouse Days, I would be getting negative cred for the one I've been listening to this week. Because I'm talking like, top 100 dance tracks or something like that is what I've been listening to. So you ready for my negative cred? Is it going to be okay? Please don't judge me.
Can't promise, but
I keep listening to Karol G. I had never heard of Karol G. This is another one where I'm losing cred because not only did I like not independently go out and discover this music, it was just like Spotify said, you would like this. And I was like, what is it? Oh, wow, I do like this. Karol G is Colombian, described as reggaeton. It's one of those genres where I'm like, if you ask me, name a reggaeton thing, I'd be like, Capleton? I don't know. Anyway, she's got this album called Mañana, Será, Bonito, Bichota season. And it's a follow-up to this one from earlier this year, which is Mañana, Será, Bonito. And I really like the second one, Bichota season. And I don't even know if that's a bad word in Colombia, as I'm saying out loud. The first one, it's okay. But the second one has this, I don't know, it's like a head bobbing. There's a song on there called Una Noche in Medellin. It has steel drums. And there's this guy rapping on there, and he says, Dímelo, baby. And I don't know. It's so fluid. It's the kind of music that makes you feel good. It's summer, and you're bobbing your head, and you get this feeling of belonging. It's like, I am in the right place at the right time and listening to the right music.
La baby ya no quiere andar sola. Ahora quiere que la bese. Se puso ready pa' mover la cola. Dar casquillo y buscarse un nuevo flete. Nena, dime si tú estás pa' mí. Como yo estoy puesto.
I'm not a great Spanish speaker, so I'm kind of clueless often to what she's singing about. But growing up here in San Diego, I do recognize a handful of the bad words. I kind of love this album, actually.
Yeah, I've listened to it a couple of times now, too. I enjoy it. I had heard of her because a couple of years ago, I was really into the Rosalia album, Moto Mami. And so this would kind of come up as a follow-on to her music would come on in the Spotify stream after that, along with Bad Bunny and things like that.
Yeah, I've listened to Bad Bunny. Kind of like it a little bit. I really wanted. So after I heard this album, the Bichota season one, I wanted to like the first one. And I went back and listened to it. It's like, it's okay. It starts with a "Don't Worry, Be Happy" sample, which I really want to love. but that album has almost like this lower level of a little more plaintive, a little more whininess to it. Maybe that's an unfair categorization of it. It's not bad, but for some reason I just really like the more recent one. I don't know. Very summer. I wonder if I'll be able to listen to it in the winter when it gets so cold and bleak here in San Diego.
Yeah, probably when you're huddling around your wood stove in your Ugg boots.
I'll no longer be like bobbing my head, feeling like I'm in the right place at the right time. At that point, I'll be listening to The Sword or Sleep or something. I have a technology question for you, and I think it's a super unfair question, but it's a typical like, hey, I haven't been doing this that long, and you're really old, so can you tell me why do technologies become popular? So this is my question for you. This is a totally fair question, right? You can just sort of tell me the answer.
Yeah. I think it's probably got something to do with looks.
Look. So we're not talking art. It'd be super unfair I'm just interested in technology here. And, we're software guys, so maybe we could focus on software. But there's a lot of interesting examples outside of software. Let me tell you a story. One of my best friends, still a good friend of mine, his name is Justin. He lives in LA. We grew up together. We've been friends since we were 11 years old. And I would go to his house, and he had this massive collection of tapes. And the tapes were Betamax tapes. And I had never seen a Betamax tape, right? This is a competitor to VHS. These are these small, they were smaller than VHS tapes. And they had a Betamax player, and it had this plastic wood paneling on top. You'd feed a little Betamax tape in. So he had they had hundreds of Betamax movies at their house. And I was like, why do you have all these things? And he went, oh, we used to go to this video store a lot in our neighborhood. And we have VHS and Betamax player. We would rent both. And that video store was shutting down. They were getting rid of their entire catalog of Betamax because nobody wanted them at this point. So they just gave them to us. So they had like huge amounts of Betamax tapes. And we would watch Creep Show was one of the movies we watched at his house. I've seen that a couple times. I don't really remember. I think Stephen King's in it. And there's like this blob that comes up to his wooden pier and melts people's faces off or something. That's one. The movie that we watched just a bonkers, absurd number of times versus any other film in his Betamax library was Strange Brew. So we watched that so many times as we were in middle school. So we were in high school. So we could probably recite at that time the entire Strange Brew, which probably looks weird for like a 12-year-old, 11-year-old kid. Anyway, so that's my experience with Betamax. And then, 10 years later, I'd see, so it was the 90s. And then, like internet, social media comes around, people start getting into arguments about stuff. And I would regularly see people say, Betamax was so much better than VHS, and they lost. And people who say this are technology interested. They're like, the technology of Betamax, so superior to VHS, and they did not win. So it's this example of the quote-unquote better thing did not win the competition. The worst thing, VHS, won. Do you know anything about this? Do you remember Betamax?
Oh, yeah. I remember it, and I also remember people insisting that Betamax was clearly better than VHS.
Do you know why? I had to try to look up why people say that. I have no idea why.
I don't remember why. I think it had something to do with just the picture quality. But
so I looked it up, and I found this one blog post for a service that somebody runs a business where they digitize things. And they have this blog post, and they're like, Betamax is better at everything. The VHS, high resolution, tapes are smaller, higher recording capacity. Used to be that you would have like The Godfather 1, and you'd have to put tape 1 in, and then it would finish, and then you'd put tape 2 in, or any of these like long movies. Betamax, you didn't have to do that because you could fit a lot more on one of these tiny little tapes. Apparently, so the argument this person makes is the reason Betamax failed was that it was put out by Sony, and they wanted to control it. And you have to pay a premium anytime you wanted to produce a Betamax tape. You had to pay it to Sony. And VHS was developed and shared as an open source technology. They didn't push any patents. JVC was the inventor, and they didn't push patents on it. So anybody could use VHS. So VHS tapes were cheaper. They're cheaper to produce. It's more accessible. This is actually my thesis. Why did Betamax get popular? Or why did VHS get popular and Betamax die? I think VHS was super convenient. It did not get popular because it was a better technology. Now, my theory is that convenience is why lots of stuff gets popular. What do you think?
I think that's probably true. I don't know if convenience is exactly the right word. I mean, I think with VHS and Betamax, one of them had to win, and Sony was making it more difficult by making it more expensive. So I think all things being equal, the cheaper option will tend to win. Betamax was probably better, but was it enough better to justify the cost premium? And I guess the market decided no, it wasn't.
I kind of like being on the sidelines and seeing people have these meltdowns where they're saying the worst thing won, and it sort of violates their fundamental expectation about the world. But I don't actually ever assume that the best technology is going to win. So maybe I'm a cynic.
Yeah.
Do you have other examples?
Well, on the software side, this is not a product that anybody would have ever heard of, but in the early part of my career, I was working on computer graphics stuff. And at the time, there were dozens of formats, both image formats and vector graphics formats and stuff like that. And there wasn't a clear winner. I mean, there's still a lot of formats today, but generally we see we see GIFs and JPEGs and PNGs and maybe a few other things, but there's not dozens of formats. But back then in late 80s, early 90s, there were quite a few. And so there were tools to convert between one and another. So there were cases where, one tool took a particular format and another tool required a different format. And so you had to convert the output of one tool into the input for another one. And
sounds like a hassle.
It was a hassle. So people had built tools around doing these conversions. And at the time I was working on one that was, well designed from a software engineering perspective, was a nice tool, but it was in competition with another tool that had been around for a while and worked and was perfectly adequate to the task. And so, in that particular case, I think the reason why the lesser technology won is because a working implementation tends to beat good plans.
I feel like you are advancing your own thesis, which is in competition with mine. So this is a battle of the thesis. So your thesis is, I'll say mine. I think that technologies become popular if they're the most convenient to use. And there are other considerations, but I think convenience is the dominant thing. How easy is it for me to use the thing? I will use that thing. You have a different thesis. Tell me what your thesis is. Just come right out and say it so that I can tell you you're wrong.
Well, I think maybe they do dovetail into each other, but I think that my thesis, I guess, is that things that exist are better than things that are planned, even if the planned thing is going to clearly be better than the thing that exists.
I say this at work all the time. Whoever builds the thing first wins. People are just going to use that.
Yeah, this was true in the late 80s as well. There were lots of ANSI standards and ISO standards that people were trying to implement, but there were non-standard things that did the same work that were in place, functional, effective, and the standards just couldn't compete because there weren't enough people willing to implement to those protocols.
It does sound like we're sort of arguing two sides of the same coin here. Having a thing built is pretty convenient. Another way I always say this is you close your eyes, you picture Kevin Costner, you say to yourself in a field of was it corn? If you build it, they will come.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
What I say. It's a software thing. He's talking about like I'm building this web application and then people will just show up and start using it. So in high school, my physics teacher had this whole lecture about alternating current and direct current and Tesla versus Edison. And unfortunately, I don't really remember it. But it was a similar type of thing where one of these, there were different, there were benefits to some. I probably shouldn't even raise this. I don't even know. Is one better?
Yeah, I remember these stories as well about competing technologies for the electrical grid. Edison was on the DC side, and I guess Tesla is associated with the, not the company, but the Nikola Tesla was associated with the alternating current option.
You remember the physics lecture. I don't remember.
I don't remember the details. I just know that there were some sort of dubious shenanigans that people got up to demonstrate the benefits of their technologies.
I wonder if it's clear in that case. I wonder if the Betamax lost again in that case. I actually couldn't even tell you which one is the Betamax in this model and which one. I mean, obviously.
I think
go ahead.
In the long term, I think the alternating current, is the better choice, and it also won out.
Okay, so maybe Betamax won. That was the one Tesla wanted.
It was, yes.
Another one in our careers that actually is I'm not too old for was XML versus JSON. I mean, so when we write programs to talk to servers, we need to send them data to act on, and they want to send us response data that we can act on, right? And there are a myriad ways that we could format this information. A lot of times we're sending these requests over protocol like HTTP, right? Same thing that your browser uses. So I'll use that same technology to transmit a message to the server, and it'll send me some response. And when I'm transmitting this message, I'm going to include some information. It's going to have some information back. And in my early career, I would have to use XML a lot, and it sucked. And it's like, it was sort of like this very legalistic form of HTML, if you've ever seen HTML. And then I started hearing about this thing called JSON. And I was thinking, man, I don't want to have to learn another format. That sucks. JSON. Wow, this sounds intense. This sounds hard. And then I saw examples of it and I was like, wait a minute, that's it? JSON looks like just data that you would encode in virtually any programming language. It looks it doesn't look like you're even encoding it. I mean, you are encoding it. You have these keys and values. You throw away all kinds of alligator mouths, right? Those are the greater than and less than signs on either side of the HTML tags. XML. Do you remember this? XML versus JSON? Hated working with JSON. And I never could find anybody who would be like, oh, XML's... Oh, actually, no, that's not true. Every so often people would be like, XML's better than JSON because you get this like hierarchical representation of information. You can encode a lot more. Do you remember this argument?
I remember lots of these arguments. And the irony, I guess, is that XML was promoted as something that was readable by humans, structured and with a clear syntax, and where you could layer a schema on top of it and make sure that it conformed to a schema, but was still readable by humans. And so I guess it's kind of weird that the main thing that people disliked about it was that it was so unreadable and verbose.
Not readable enough, my friend. And these like XML parsers, geez. Remember working with those back in the day. Well, and similarly with XML and JSON was SOAP and REST. SOAP was like, it was like, I'm going to send instructions to a server using XML, and SOAP has this formatted ways of structuring the XML, like particular documents, and REST was very popular now and has been for a long time, primarily using JSON as another related type of argument. I would argue, back to my thesis, I'll just keep repeating it. Maybe I'll be believable if I just say the same thing over and over again, that the things that won, in this case JSON, is just so much more convenient to use. There's so few hassles in my way to using it. I guess it's worth asking, is it technically a good technology? Go ahead, though.
So I agree and disagree with you on that. I remember going to the Microsoft PDC in, I think, 2000.
What's that? PDC? What is that?
Professional Developers Conference.
Oh, wow. That sounds very generic.
It was at the Staples Center, and Counting Crows played.
Wow, this is a massive conference. Why did you go to this conference?
At the time, I was doing Microsoft stuff.
C++?
And the C++, and, there's sort of variation of it. And, they had been pushing COM.
I was going to say, did you have to do the COM stuff and the DLLs and all that junk? Stuff I don't understand.
Yeah. And so the 2000 PDC was when they had announced the .NET framework. And the .NET stuff at this conference at the beginning was deeply, deeply connected to XML. So you describe the interfaces with XML. They were using WSDL, the Web Services Description Language, which was XML. They were using a API protocol that was basically SOAP. They were promoting XML databases. They were promoting XML schemas. They were promoting XPath and stuff like that for doing queries on XML databases.
XML databases?
XML
what
databases,
is that?
Yeah.
What's that?
So, like, literally you have XML documents, and to query them, you would use XPath and similar technologies.
Oh, just like a document store now. Like Elasticsearch is going to index JSON. Mongo is going to index JSON. Okay. I guess I shouldn't have been surprised that existed.
Yeah, so initially the .NET stuff was just, I haven't done .NET for 20 years, so I don't know where it's at now, but initially it was very deeply tied to XML. And I would not say that XML was inconvenient. I think maybe what happened there, and this is kind of similar to what happened to enterprise Java at some point is that they threw in so much stuff that it wasn't convenient because you had to know so many things and use so many different ancillary technologies to make things useful. So it sort of conforms to your thesis, but it also it's not so much that XML, the basic technology, wasn't convenient. It was just that they layered so much stuff on top of it. I don't know if you had experience with the enterprise Java world, but
not really. Done a little bit of Java.
There was a huge interest in Java at the beginning. Mid '90s when it first came out, people were just super stoked on it, and a lot of people adopted it pretty quickly. And over time, I think what made people sort of sour on it was the stuff they layered around this enterprise Java technology.
Yeah, I mean, my Java experience is like Spring Boot, hacking on Spring Boot apps that other people have written.
Yeah, I mean, it became sort of a industry joke that, there were sort of like multiple layers of indirection, factories.
That joke's still around, yeah. Factory beans. That's a Spring Boot joke people make.
So, it wasn't that Java was a clunky language. It was just that people were trying to build these frameworks on top of it that made it sort of impenetrable.
Well, I think the web is a really interesting use case here. I like how I expertly laid a rhetorical trap for you, and you said it wasn't inconvenient, and then you said it was convenient. I'm going to take that as like I did that on purpose. I made you back yourself into agreeing with my thesis.
I feel like there's a Wittgenstein reference coming up here.
No, I don't have one. I was just sort of jokingly pretending that I know what I'm doing rhetorically. I don't. I open my mouth and sounds come out, and then I go, oh, that sounds interesting. I want to talk about web because I'm going to sort of stupidly say that in the 90s it seemed like you had Java for building web apps, right? And then you had Perl, and then you had PHP. And I think this is another one of those arguments. Now, I don't want to say any one of these is a bad technology. I'm not really interested in trying to advance that critique. A lot of these things have developed and grown over time, But it is interesting what became popular and what people complain about. There is always that Bjorn Strostrup quote, which is there are languages people complain about and languages nobody uses. So maybe there's that. But you look at something like WordPress, which became hugely popular. And at one point, 20% of all websites you'd visit were built on top of WordPress, which is built on top of PHP. And there's all this, security problems that were in the early versions of it. So you could argue, yeah, this thing got extremely popular very rapidly. Why? Maybe I'm going to throw you a bone here. Maybe it is because they built the thing and somebody else was like, well, you built it first, I'll just use yours. What do you think?
I think that's maybe part of it. I don't have a good enough history with PHP to know what people were transitioning from when they started using PHP. It's conceivable to me that maybe if you were coming from Cold Fusion or something like that PHP looked pretty sophisticated.
Yeah, I mean, what were your alternatives, right? Perl, PHP. Yeah. I mean, PHP probably seems significantly easier to just start with, I would imagine.
Yeah, and if you weren't familiar with it already, it probably looked a lot simpler than going to something like Java servlets or something like that.
Yeah, and then along comes this thing WordPress, where it's like you run a couple commands, it'll bootstrap a MySQL database for you, it'll spin up this web application, and you can immediately start saying, I want to put posts and pages together, and it's got this beautiful interface, extremely convenient to use. Similarly, I think you look at in the 2000s, these what became massive websites like Twitter and GitHub were built on top of Ruby on Rails. Instagram was built on top of Django. These web frameworks, Django is a Python 1, Ruby on Rails, Ruby framework, they became hugely popular. And I guess I would argue they're not as popular now, but why did they become so popular? I think they made it pretty easy to build web applications.
Yeah, I would agree. I also am kind of surprised about the things that have supplanted them.
Yeah, okay, I want to know what's that? What are you surprised? What did you have in mind there?
Well, for instance, I don't understand. I'm a Python guy, so it has worked out well for me. But I don't entirely understand why Python has absorbed so much of the web app market. I don't really have a lot of insight on the front end, so I don't know why, for instance, things like React have become so popular on the front end.
Another good example, right? You have Angular JS, then Angular, then React. Yeah, good example.
Yeah, I was perfectly happy with jQuery, so I don't see what people are getting out of React. But why? I have this sense with Python that people wanted to build web frameworks in Python because they were using it for other things, and they didn't want to have to switch between technologies, to do back-end stuff and then do web stuff and data science stuff. And so Python web frameworks became popular just because people wanted to use Python for other aspects of their applications, and they didn't want to have to employ a bunch of technologies. But that's fairly easily countered by the fact that we do typically now use combinations of JavaScript or TypeScript on the front end with Python or other things on the back end. So
yeah, that separation between front end and back end really still surprises me. We're going to build a full application on the front end. It's going to talk to a separate application on the back end. There are some people who say I want to do both of those in the same language, which typically means a Node.js backend. I actually go back to this convenience thesis. When I look at Django, and I have respect for the Django project, I think Django became popular because it was super convenient in certain areas. Now, it didn't do what WordPress does. It doesn't automatically bootstrap a database for you. But it's got a lot of functionality around talking to a database. You're running a web app, you're going to put stuff in the database, you're going to get it back out. Django has a couple of features which are surprisingly convenient on a variety of projects. One, baked into it, they automatically handle user authentication, login, change password, all that stuff, just included in there, kitchen sink. And the other thing is the admin interface, where I can arbitrarily create new, types of records. And Django has this interface that I can load a portal and go into it and start manipulating records via the web application, which is called Django Admin. I think that those things are so convenient that points to the popularity of Django. And I think the popularity of Django led to more popularity in the web applications for Python, because it is easy to write these things in Python. And then people say, well, wait a minute, maybe I don't need Django's admin, I don't need user stuff, I want a smaller app, so maybe I'll just do this Flask thing. And then Flask eventually becomes hugely popular in the Python world. And then Flask isn't async, and people are like, well, I'm doing a lot of database and network calls, so now I need an async one, so I'm going to use this new framework called Fast API, which is hugely popular now in the Python world. And I would argue that in each case, there's a kind of convenience thing happening, and that describes the popularity of these tools.
Yeah, I think that's right. There is sort of a contingency there too, though, where the async Python frameworks couldn't have sort of sprung out of nowhere. There had to be this evolution from Django to Flask to Starlet or Fast API.
Right. And it is influenced by Node.js, which is event based. Right, there's an event loop in there.
Yeah.
So everybody stole that idea from them.
Well, I don't know about that, but
what about things that people are passionate defenders of, but are not popular? So, there are probably people out there in the world today who are huge Betamax fans, and they're still carrying the flag, right? They have this bonfire burning.
Yeah.
The rest of the world is wrong. We should be using Betamax. Check out my Betamax library. I've got Creepshow and Strange Brew. Can you think of any technologies where there are people who insist this is the best thing, and it just continues to not take off?
Well, this is kind of a bad example because it's not software, and it was at one time ridiculously popular, but there's still a considerable number of people who insist that vinyl is the best way to listen to music.
Ooh, that's a tough one for me to. I'm just going to let you talk about that and get away from this controversy. Please tell me more.
I'm on the fence myself about whether or not it really is a better thing. I've had people tell me that the difference between digital media and good analog is very clearly audible, and I'm not sure that it is for me. So that's either a weakness in my brain or my ears. But that it doesn't seem like vinyl is going away. I can't think of a really good software version of vinyl, though.
One of the Drive Like Jehu records was a CD. I had it on CD. You pull the CD out, and there were artwork painted on the CD that said "CDs effing blow."
Yeah, very popular opinion. Even among people who are otherwise disposed to being technophiles, there are a lot of people who prefer good old analog. I mean, even people who collect like tube amplifiers and things like that. But there's been a lot of technologies over the years that people have been very profoundly dedicated to that have never taken off. Prolog is one thing that comes to mind.
Oh, the logic programming language?
Yeah, the logic programming language. I've had a couple of friends over the years who were just fanatical about it, and for reasons that I don't really understand, it's never had a significant impact on industry.
The hard part for me is it's hard to know if those friends of yours are right. I like the betamax example because you could be like, yeah, it really did. It did seem like a better technology. There's like a clear, obvious benefit to using this technology versus the one that became popular. I think that's why people get so heated about it. I want to find more of those. We can objectively say this thing is better than its competitors. Prolog's probably a harder one to say that for.
I think it depends on what you're talking about. If you're trying to actually do logic programming, Prolog is probably better than its competitors. But
yeah.
Not that many people are attempting to do it.
So. That reminds me of my friends who are just like vociferously boosters for BSD versus Linux. And I don't know, you can talk about something like, Docker containers, and they'll be like, BSD had that years ago.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, so is it better? Is it truly better? Why isn't it winning? The other example I think of as a technology that has passionate defenders, although this is a totally compromised example because I could tell you myself reasons why I could see it not taking off, is Haskell, the programming language. So you and I have both done Haskell. I've done Haskell. I started doing Haskell probably 10 years ago and haven't done much in the last 3 years because I started mostly doing Rust. Haskell is one of those languages where people who are involved in that community are passionate about the programming language. And they're primarily passionate about the programming language as a way to build programs that are correct from the beginning. A lot of times we write programs that have all kinds of failures and bugs in them. And so people who are passionate about Haskell feel like it's a language where you are less likely to make errors in the construction of your program. It'll be correct by design. There's a famous Haskell contributor named Brian Sullivan, and he was interviewed once years ago. And the interviewer said to him, "When do you think Haskell is going to take off?" And this is a guy who wrote very popular libraries in the language. He said, "I don't think it ever will." and at the time, I think people were like, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, I think if it were going to take off and be ubiquitous, it would have already done that. It hasn't gotten there. It's not going to happen."
Yeah, I think this is a good example of your convenience argument. For some definition of convenience. I like Haskell, but if you contrast it to, say, Python, there was this essay that Paul Graham wrote once about why why Python was popular, and his view was that it was popular because it was a good hacker language. You could just sort of sit down and start doing things and experiment with stuff. And I think the thing with Haskell is it makes it possible to write very complicated things correctly, but it also makes it very hard to do very simple things.
Yeah, there were some terse, beautiful lines of code that I have written and read in Haskell, and I loved it for that reason. But yeah, I don't think it's very convenient. It's not I just want to send an HTTP request. It's not even that convenient to get like you want to write a program and somebody's going to give you some input and you're going to act on it. It's not even that convenient for that. So yeah, I think it's a good example of a convenience problem. I want you, okay, so I don't really have any other examples. If you have other examples, we should get to those. But before we close, I want you to take me back to this conference, this Microsoft conference. I just want to be there in my mind. 2000 Staples Center. Was Steve Ballmer there? Were people? Was it like a Dockers and collared shirts type of conference?
I honestly don't remember. I don't think Ballmer was there. At least I did not see him. But it was a pretty big deal at the time. They took up most of the convention center. They served us really good food, which was nice.
Almost wanted to ask about the food. How weird is that? You're talking about a convention, and I'm like, what did you eat?
Yeah, back in those days, I sort of judged conventions by the quality of the food.
Me too. Served, that's why I wanted to ask. I was like, this must have been a big convention. Was the food good?
It was also one of the first conventions that I went to where they had wireless access.
Ooh. So here's the interesting thing to me about a convention like that. You go and there's a ton of people around you and they're talking about technologies. You feel like, wow, this is it. This is where things are happening. Like we're at one of the focus points that things are going to now branch off of this moment, this geographical point in space, this moment in time. People are going to leave this and they're going to determine the future. And there's a way in which that's a kind of idealism which is pretty naive in relation to our conversation, because you brought it up as here we are talking about technologies at this conference, huge deal. People don't really use this stuff much anymore.
Yeah, in my career, that's probably the key case of a technology that everybody thought was going to be universally adopted, and which, .NET's still around, still very popular.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
Still see it for lots of job ads and stuff like that. So it's the nominal technology is still a pretty big deal, but the way they intended to do it, I think, is largely gone by the wayside.
So next week, I want to talk about that more. Ideas that died. Go ahead, though.
Well, I think one reason why people were excited about it back then is because up until that point, the Microsoft universe was pretty closed. There weren't, you had to write front-end code with their foundation libraries, and you had to write, the back-end stuff with their COM and C++ libraries. And there was this idea that by introducing, these web services and discovery of web services, that you didn't necessarily have to write them in the same, with a Microsoft technology, you could implement a web service that was SOAP-based and had, a WSDL definition, and things could find these, and your applications could find these services and use them. And so I think there was this excitement about the idea that this was sort of the new platform for service-based architectures, and that it was not necessarily closed to the Microsoft world.
Oh, that actually is a really interesting point that we just stumbled on there. So the mistake we heard that Sony made with Betamax was they really wanted to control it. They wanted to close it off. You have to pay them if you want to use this technology. And it sounds like what you're talking about here with this conference is Microsoft is trying to say, no, we're going to open this up. You want to write a service in Haskell? Cool. You just have to do the SOAP WSDL thing, and it should work.
Right, and from the Microsoft perspective, I think that was a big deal. But I think if the rest of the world thought, well, I can do an HTTP GET and return XML and get pretty much the same thing with relatively minimal effort. And so I think it goes back to your convenience argument. It wasn't really that hard to write web services, even in 2000. So all of the extra stuff that they were providing, even though it was interesting, wasn't really necessary, and it certainly was not convenient as compared to just writing a fairly spare HTTP based service.
So necessary and convenient. This reminds me of philosophy classes where we used to talk about things that were necessary and sufficient. So to close this off, your argument is, if you build it, they will come. Whoever, that's my bad rephrasing of it. Your argument is, if somebody builds the thing, then people are going to use that thing. And my argument is, whatever is technologically the best isn't necessarily going to win. What the thing is that's most likely to win is the thing that's most convenient to use, technology, software-wise. Are these the same thing? Can we resolve this?
I think they are roughly the same thing for some definition of convenience.
You keep saying that and keep forgetting. I keep thinking, I should define convenience. Okay, yeah, so what do I mean by convenient? I guess in software, it's probably the least amount of work to build a thing. Maybe it could be, I need to learn the smallest amount of new information to build the thing. Maybe that's why like a WordPress is so popular. I want to spin it up. I want to connect to a database. I just have to run one line of code and I can immediately start clicking. I don't have to learn anything. That's pretty convenient. You really let me off the hook. You keep mentioning that I haven't defined this convenience, so you let me off the hook this whole conversation.
If my definition if my thesis behind why things work is if you build it, they will come, then I guess one qualification to that is if you build it and it's usable, they will come. So if you build something and it's like a bicycle with a nuclear reactor on it, they may not use their bicycle.
It's a lot of work to use that bicycle. All right. Thanks so much. I had fun talking to you about this. I don't think I did a great job making my argument. I just sort of this suspicion that I continue to have. I'd like to find more examples. All right, this is Picture Me Coding. My name's Erik Aker. Also with me, Mike Mall. See you later.
See you next time.
Bye-bye.